Hey guys, welcome back to Solo Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and I'll be looking at rating some of your wildcard teams, especially since this is such a big wildcard week for Game Week 7. The first wildcard team I'm going to be looking at is liamtgfpl's team. He's got 1.1 million in the bank, which is obviously quite a fair bit of money. I imagine that's probably funds that we could maybe use to upgrade a midfielder potentially. When I'm looking at this team as well, obviously the lack of Trent is very evident here. I think it does make sense because, in a sense, you get to capitalize on 1 week. But at the same time, with just 1.1 million in the bank, I'm not exactly sure if you actually have enough funds to, let's say, go back into Trent and make it reasonable. I can definitely see, pivoting away from someone like Ben Rama or Sar being possible to actually upgrade the midfield. But once again, you're still kind of restricted by having so many 6 point X players to kind of upgrade serious players. You're very much stuck in this bracket. And when you think about it, you've accumulated all the kind of players in around that 6 point X range, right? Rafinha, you've got Saka, you've got Sar, you've got Ben Rama. And it's so much harder now to move in around those territories. The benefit of sometimes having a little bit of a team that has kind of a mix in terms of budget. Let's say if you have someone who's really cheap, like Gray, is that of course that kind of offsetting potential allows you to go for an even more premium midfielder if that person sort of arises. So let's say if Grealish becomes a fantastic option in the week ahead, you're somewhat restricted from him at this point in time from getting into him. But ultimately, though, I still think the team is very, very solid. The idea, I think, of course, is going to is to be playing a back three supported by an Arsenal keeper. And I'm not going to touch on this because I'm sure everyone has Ramsdale and Foster. Here, of course, we have Ramsdale and Sanchez, which I would probably not recommend too much. I think trying to guess when teams get clean sheets is always incredibly tough. I'd just rather you spend that 0.5 mil somewhere secure in your starting 11 if possible, right? Because when we think about it, that 1.6 million can take us to Trent from someone like Alonso. Let's say if Trent falls to 7.5, which I imagine he actually will. When we actually also look across into the midfield, I think the issue with Sarr and Ben Rama is that those are both arguably players who will have fixtures drying up for them in the near future, and maybe you wouldn't be so interested in actually keeping Ben Rama around. Also having the 3-4-3 formation here, I do really like it, and to be honest, I can understand having Marcel because you already have an Arsenal keeper, so I think I don't really have any qualms, to be honest, with the defense. I think it's a fantastic defense. It's more really the midfield where I think you're better suited with maybe a long-term or more medium-term enabler, so that you can actually satisfy maybe getting a slightly more premium midfielder in the future. And obviously someone like Grealish is on my personal watch list, but maybe you're looking at someone else as well. Maybe even someone to upgrade from Tony if, let's say, you don't fancy him. But of course, I understand getting Tony now means that you're just holding it long term at the same time. So I can completely understand going for Tony and really holding him for many, many fixtures, especially since they have a nice fixture swing at game week 10. I guess my only issue would be, once again, how you actually play out the midfield in terms of spending your budget, right? Ultimately, when you're playing 3-4-3, you're probably still better off having an enabler because you don't really want to be benching, let's say, a 6.2, 6.5 million player on a week-to-week basis. And I guess that's where the trouble lies. I think even when you're juggling with Tony, who could be sitting on the bench for a while, ultimately it's still a tough task. I think one of our kind of Discord community members was juggling between Tony and Rafinha at the start of the season, and despite choosing the right fixtures, Rafinha could haul in the harder one and Tony could haul in the harder one as well, and both could blank on the easy one, and that's kind of the issue. I think I'm still less of a fan of having such a deep bench, if that makes sense, but for the most part I really like this team. The next team is going to be Jams 2's team, and I think, once again, I don't really have to talk much about the keepers. There's no kind of keeper rotation here, so that's totally fine. I would probably say, I guess Foster could be a good bench keeper just because he's actually playing right now. I don't know if he actually keeps his spot over Bachmann, but we'll actually see whether that remains to be the case. We have Williams in the team, which I think is a little bit questionable. I think we have enough capacity to say and enough money, I think, in and around the league to actually move away from someone like Williams. And I think that's the only issue with this team, right? When you're looking at the team, the bench is very, very thin already. You've got Williams and you've got Mendy, who both really aren't going to bring you many points on a week-to-week basis. Yes, Williams is a consistent starting player for Norwich, but we know that they're conceding a lot of goals and they're not a good side right now. And I don't really just see many opportunities for him, for example, to get attacking hauls. I'd honestly probably risk it to go all the way to someone like Duffy, right, who actually plays for Brighton. And the fact that you don't have Sanchez anymore means that you no longer have to play off of a Brighton double. In terms of Mendy, I actually have Mendy in my own team, so fully admit that I think that could be just a sort of thing for budget reasons. I'm not exactly sure how you plan to play off of Vardy, but I think the crux of this wildcard team, of course, is playing through Vardy, right? He is going to be the huge differential compared to everyone else. You've kept Trent as well, which I think, I don't know if the team will change due to the injury of Trent, because of course it's a very thin back three for this kind of week as we head into the Man City Liverpool game, and really only Rudiger arguably has a good fixture. Cancelo probably makes the most sense in the subsequent week, but if you're wildcarding now, of course I can understand going for this team. Sarr and Benrahma, similar kind of discussions as before, and I think the same with Doucouré. I do think Doucouré is having a fantastic season. I can't really explain why that is. I think tactically, of course, you can see him play as more of a box-to-box player as opposed to kind of playing like a holding mid, right? And playing as a kind of pivot with Alan. He now really has the license to actually attack inside the box, and I think he's really thriving. But I also think at the same time, Doucouré is slightly overperforming expectations, and most of his hauls have come from the poorer teams. And when Everton's fixtures kind of swing the other way around, I think maybe someone like Gallagher interests me just a little bit more. In terms of Benrahma and Sarr, I can understand holding these players for a while if you're actually interested in them. Some might be a little bit more towards the camp that they are short-term assets, but I don't necessarily think that's the case. I guess the reason why you have Benrahma is to somewhat cover Antonio. I don't know if that's enough to cover Antonio, to be honest. Maybe right now you can drop someone like Trent, maybe pick up someone like Van Dijk, so you can still fit Tony into your team, because I can still I think comfortably say that Antonio is probably one of the most well-priced assets in the league, right? So even though Tony makes a lot of sense as an option, I kind of see Tony as a good downgrade from either Vardy or let's say Antonio if you actually have him in your team, and then maybe you can kind of play around with the midfield. But I think, for the most part, this is a very strong team. You just need to kind of work on your bench and make sure that you actually have consistent options, because we've already seen over the course of the season that even if you wildcard and set yourself up for the future, look at the situation with the DCL injury, look at the situation with the Rafinha injury, or rather kind of concern, and then the Bamford injury that is an actual concern, right? I, for example, was hit very poorly by this and kind of hurt by it, but you might be putting yourself in a very kind of weak position that would allow you to be subject to that if you kind of keep that very thin, probably not very high earning points bench. In terms of the third team, I'm actually looking at 009 STW's team, and once again, not going to talk really much about the keepers. I think the backline is interesting because instead of going for Rudiger, you've gone for Alonso and Christensen. And that probably is just due to kind of budget cutting reasons. I mean, arguably, of course, we can say Alonso can drop down to Rudiger. And with the most recent Champions League game, you could argue that there could be a basis for Tuchel to actually drop Alonso at times. And that he's not as nailed as we thought. I think we all knew that Alonso would probably rotate at some point in the season with Chilwell. I still think Chilwell hasn't really shown many good performances in his cup matches and his features. So I think that is the benefit if you're an Alonso holder. I guess the only kind of worry, I suppose, is that Chalobah can come in and maybe Chilwell can come in, and then both Alonso and Christensen are a threat. Whereas it seems like Rudiger pretty much has the position set in the team as long as he is fit, and that's the kind of security I'd probably like in this team. I know having Livramento really covers you from these kind of situations, but I imagine that with this kind of structure, you're looking to play a back four. And you don't really want to have two rotation-prone players, or three, to be honest, when you include Cancelo. So I think that might be a cause of concern. You might actually rather just maybe go for Rudiger, spend that kind of money in terms of upgrading another kind of midfielder in the team, if you'd like. I really like the kind of midfield in terms of going for Gallagher and Rafinha. I think Rafinha is arguably a must-have, but of course you have to kind of factor in the international fixtures as well and how impactful they are. The Townsend pick for me is actually a pick that will probably fall in terms of value in the future. I really do like Smith Rowe's price, and I think, of course, he's a good differential to have in your team, and he gives really solid kind of bench strength. But I think with Townsend, his strength right now is having penalties with the team. But with DCL and Richarlison coming back in and coming back to fitness, I just think he's not really the kind of hold you want at this point in time when you're kind of building for a wild card and moving to a more medium term team, right? And that's pretty much how I see things. In terms of Ings, I'm not a huge fan of Ings. I know that the fixtures are about to swing for Aston Villa, but I think even in the games where Aston Villa are actually doing well recently, I wouldn't say Ings has had the best underlying stats or that the team is playing solely around him. I think the interesting thing about Aston Villa right now is that with the kind of press that they have and the kind of more, I would say, free-flowing attacking structure, we now are actually seeing a basis to say that some of the other midfielders are going to haul a little bit more this season. Watkins is, of course, a partnership there, but I'm not a huge fan of Watkins because I feel like he does sort of undersell his chances and really he runs offside way too often for me to be appreciative of what he brings to the table. I think Ings is at that kind of price where I would say someone like Tony is still a little bit more interesting to me, and he has a swing at a similar sort of time, right? And that can maybe push an upgrade over someone like Townsend, in my opinion. But if you like to keep Ings and you see him as your differential, then that's totally fine. The last team that I'm going to look at is going to be Thomas McStay's team. As a general thought as well, I think a lot of people have gone for very similar wild cards. So interesting to see a lot of people going for Cancelo, no one going for Diaz. I think that's pretty much the strength of having a Livramento this season, having a Tomiyasu in your bench or a 4.5 player who's very strong. So I think as long as you have a secure enough bench, you can kind of justify going for Cancelo, sorry. With Rudiger and Alonso, I really like having both of them in the team. They're probably the most logical Chelsea options to get, as long as you have the money for it and you'd like to spend your money in that sort of direction. Getting Grealish early is also super interesting. I mentioned that Grealish is one of those kind of midfield targets that I'd love to look at, especially moving away from Jota. And that's kind of how I see things right now, right? Salah, I think, of course, you keep him in your team, and for that reason, when you're kind of stretching out your midfield, you're going to be looking at players like Doucouré and etc. I do think Doucouré has a little bit of an expiration date, but I can understand going for him at this point in time. I'm probably a little bit more of a fan of Gallagher just for that slight price increase. I know you don't have the budget for it right now, but I would basically just suggest dropping Bamford at this point in time, especially when you have a wild card, right? If you have a wild card, I just can't really see the reason to go into Bamford. You have a week to capitalize on a fantastic fixture from a striker, and that's pretty much what I would suggest because the rest of the team makes a lot of sense and is very lovely. But that's it for now for this video. I hope you guys had a wonderful week. A lot of the wildcards are somewhat similar in terms of template, but I will say that there are going to always be those 2 to 3 to 4 picks that you have in your team that you can put in or take in from your bench that will always make a difference compared to other sides. A lot of people are going to have Lukaku. Everyone will have Rudiger and Cancelo in the near future. But it's all about the kind of picks in your midfield and maybe getting it right. I would suggest, of course, looking more into the fixtures of some of the midfielders. Maybe you could argue that Gallagher has some rough fixtures, but I think he has been very consistent even in the tougher games. When you look at some of the other teams that are surging right now, I'd say Arsenal are definitely in that kind of camp. I would say Everton would probably be downtrending. I think they've been overperforming slightly in terms of scoring goals. Perhaps have a deeper look into them and whether you actually want those assets. Otherwise, you're sort of just kind of stuck in a situation where you're chasing points. But that's all I kind of have to offer for this video. Really nice to actually see that a lot of people have imparted the advice of maybe even considering a 4-back formation. It's not for everyone. I understand that it might be a bit boring at times, but I think this is 100% the season to go for it. Regardless, I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead, and I'll see you guys soon.